Well, to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by the former BBC Scotland editor and columnist, Brian Taylor. We'll then hear from a newly elected Scottish Labour MP. But Brian, I'll start with you. What's your assessment of why the SNP did so badly?
There was a push factor and there was a pull factor. The push factor was Labour making the argument successfully, as it turns out, in Scotland, that the people of Scotland should get on board with what was going to be a Labour drive, a Labour momentum, that there was going to be a Labour government, and that Scotland could play a part in that. Labour argued successfully, that Scottish MPs should be on the Labour side, joining in the Labour momentum. Now, John Swinney was arguing the opposite. He was saying that London only pays attention when Scotland votes SNP, that Labour was going to win anyway, that the Tories were gone, and that Scotland could therefore safely vote for the SNP. Turned out not to be the case. Then there was the pull factor. People were pulling away, drawing away from the SNP. They were seen, of course, as you mentioned, as incumbents. They've been in power at Holyrood for 17 years. When you've been in power for as long as that, you make enemies, you annoy people. People begin to get exasperated. They see the health service not as good as it should be. They see the education service not as good as it should be. Now, in vain, John Swinney pointed out that these circumstances prevailed in Tory-run England and Labour-run Wales, but that didn't wash either. And so he suffered, the SNP suffered an attack on their position as being incumbents, but they suffered from support going in behind Labour. Basically, Labour said to the people of Scotland, okay, maybe many of you support independence. We don't believe in a referendum, but can we park that question for now and just get rid of the Tories and row in behind Labour? And that argument proved to be successful.
I totally agree with that analysis. I mean, I spent a bit of time, the Times radio election bus went up to Dundee, and I spent some time in East Renfrewshire and Coatbridge in Lanarkshire, and certainly...
A fine and noble city of Dundee. Guess where I was born?
Oh, hey, absolutely. The sunniest place in Scotland. I did not realise that, Brian.
It is the sunniest spot. When you were being rained on in College Green, you should have gone to Brodie Ferry. You'd have got on much better.
You get your Broughty Ferry tan. I love it. But what was interesting is that the change message was that what I was definitely hearing from people was the change message was definitely want to change the Tories, but a lot of people were like, yes, I also want to sort of I've had enough of the SNP. But look, what do you think this means for the independent cause? Because I spoke to quite a few people on the doorstep who said, I still would like an independent Scotland, but it's not a total priority for me right now.
Right now, at this moment, the priority was to make change. Folk were heartily, totally, thoroughly, and utterly sick of the governing Conservatives. Some say that Rishi Sunak lost on that when he decided to come away early, unbelievably, from D-Day and an opportunity to meet with the German Chancellor. No. He lost way before that. He lost when the Tories lost with the Truss budget. They lost when Boris Johnson said, "Party anyone?" They lost it in the history of the party. They probably lost. 2019 was a bit of a blip, if you remember. 2019 was an election based for the Conservatives on get Brexit done. That message resonated with the people. But remember 2017, yes. Theresa May calling an election which she expected to win. She didn't. She ended up having to do a deal with the DUP. The Tories have been struggling for quite some time, and eventually they were absolutely kicked from office by people who were completely sick of the way things were. Now, will Labour make it any better? That's going to be a real challenge. It's going to be a real difficulty. But regarding the SNP argument for independence, they say there is still a mandate for a referendum because of the 2021 Holyrood result, when the SNP and the Greens had a majority of seats and both parties support independence. It's all very well to say that. It's specious. It's fictitious in reality. Momentum is now behind the Labour Party, hugely behind the Labour Party, and they don't back independence, and they wouldn't tolerate a further referendum. Does that mean independence has gone away? No. Does it mean the SNP will park it as a question? Behave yourself. The SNP will continue to argue for it as their fundamental reason for existing. But I think they accept privately that the spark and the fire has gone out of it for the moment anyway, for this period.
And the other thing, just to let my listeners, and this is something that I think is really, really important, and we must keep it on our horizon. There are very important Holyrood elections coming up in 2026. Yeah. And Do you think there's a chance that Anna Sarwar could become First Minister, or do you think John Swinney and the SNP can use the fact that there's a Labour government in Westminster, and if there isn't tangible change in Scotland, they can say, look, you've got a new set of faces in Westminster, but your lives haven't changed for the better, stick with us?
If I may say so, Aisha, that's extremely astute, because that's exactly the concern that is worrying, very, very worrying, to privately to Labour members in Scotland. Anna Sarwar barely allowed the UK general election to get by before he declared the start of the campaign for that 2026 contest. He said that stage 1 was to get rid of the UK Tories, and stage 2 for him was to get rid of the SNP government from Scotland. In the first 2 parliaments of the devolved Scottish Parliament, Labour were in power in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. I think that might be feasible again, but John Swinney is adamant that he will continue to fight, continue to try and win for the SNP. And you're right that the argument that the SNP will make when John Swinney meets the Prime Minister, he's already talked with him on the phone, he's keen to cooperate and to work. But he will say, if you give us, if you end austerity, if you give us further resources, if you stop vetoing legislation as was done under the previous administration, then we can work with you. But Mr. Swinney will also say that the problems confronting public services are not unique to Scotland, nor England or Wales. They are in common. But he will say the underlying question is the austerity that was enforced, but as he argues, by 14 years of Conservative governance, and he will seek a change to that. He will then point out, if it doesn't happen and Labour doesn't open the purse, and they're saying no increase in taxation, no increase in borrowing, no increase in government debt, he will say if they don't open the purse, he will turn and put the blame upon the Labour government. It depends how patient people are in Scotland. If they're prepared to wait. The thing is, the UK political timetable is now 4 to 5 years for the next UK general election. As you rightly say, it's less than 2 in Scotland. That means there has to be big delivery and early delivery in Scotland. I think Labour will look to the issue you've just been discussing, the New Deal for workers, the enhanced pay for the minimum wage, as being something that they can say that is a concrete offer to Scotland. Because you know what? The UK government in Scotland doesn't control health, doesn't control education, doesn't control justice, the police. These are all devolved to Holyrood, but they do control that issue of the minimum wage, how reluctant employers might be.
Well, listen, Brian, always excellent to catch up with you. Thanks very much for your time. That's Brian Taylor, former BBC Scotland editor and columnist at the Herald. Look, it was a fantastic night for Labour. They went from having just 2 MPs. They had only 1 MP for a long time. Then they went to 2. And then in the wee hours of Friday morning through Friday, they got 37 MPs. Now, let's speak to one of those new Scottish Labour MPs. She is now the Labour MP for Midlothian, Kirsty McNeill. Kirsty, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So, look, first of all, what does it feel to be a new MP? You've campaigned hard in that seat. The SNP were very, very dominant for a long time. How does that feel?
Well, we've been campaigning really hard in Midlothian for well over a year, and it was fantastic to see that rewarded with people choosing change. But also in terms of the bigger picture, I'll be honest, it's completely overwhelming watching Keir Starmer walk into Downing Street, seeing this fantastic cabinet, announced a cabinet that really looks like the country that has lived lives in common with so many of my constituents. It's just a really overwhelming feeling. 14 years is a very, very long time indeed to have waited.
Yes, Labour has spent a long, brutal period in opposition, but now Labour's come to power. You are a new MP, and just look, picking up on the point that the brilliant Brian Taylor was making, who's somebody very well respected analyst of Scottish politics. The point he was making there is a really important one at the end. There are these really important elections coming up in Holyrood, and there will be a lot of pressure. You will all want to have seen a Labour government deliver something, a couple of good things for the people of Scotland. Otherwise, that gives the SNP something to sort of go on. How confident are you that will happen?
Well, I'd say 2 things. First of all, that campaign has already begun. I don't think the people who were elected on Thursday night, Friday morning will stop. All of us will keep being on the doorsteps, engaging with our communities to have that strong sense of what they need and want from us. The Holyrood elections are immediately upon us, almost in political terms. They're very, very quickly upon us. So we'll keep campaigning as if we are still in election mode. But the place where I might slightly disagree with Brian is I think there was more of a positive edge to what happened on Thursday. I think people did proactively choose change. They did undoubtedly want to get rid of the Tories and believed Labour to be a vehicle to do that. And they did want to maximise Scotland's influence and did clearly think that having Labour MPs at the heart of a Labour government, not SNP MPs sort of shouting from the sidelines, was a way to maximise the influence of them and their families. But they did also positively respond to the offer that Labour put in front of them, in particular to the New Deal for Working People and GB Energy that will be headquartered in Scotland. So there was a positive prospectus, albeit they were in, resource-constrained times. There was a positive prospectus put in front of them and they chose it.
And look, the other question that I'm interested to hear is, this new rump of Scottish MPs. How much do you think this new Scottish caucus will put pressure on Keir Starmer? I'm very conscious, you and I have known each other for a long time through Labour politics. One of the most damning phrases that was used about the Labour Party in Scotland was by the outgoing leader of the Scottish Party, Joanne Lamont, who criticised the Scottish Labour Party being like the branch office of a Westminster-based UK Labour Party. And that put like a real pressure on the Scottish Labour Party to say, no, we are going to stand up for the people of Scotland. We're not just going to be told what to do by Westminster. That was quite an important moment if you were a student of Scottish politics and Labour politics. How much will you as a new caucus, I suppose, stand up to the Labour leadership when you do feel that they are not delivering enough for Scotland?
I think there's a very strong sense that there is going to be one Scottish Labour team, so made up of MSPs and of Scottish MPs advancing Scotland's interest. But the thing I would say that has moved on since the last SPLP, the Scottish Parliamentary Labour Party, was the sizes. This is now a parliamentary party made up almost exclusively of people who came of age politically under a time of devolution. So this is a completely normal way of working for us, that different decisions are made at different levels of government, and that is a happy, positive, progressive Labour achievement that we're really keen to see work and make it work. And what we've had for the last period is two governments. They've had this terrible symbiotic relationship in London and in Edinburgh, both wanting each other to fail, and that, be more interested in fighting each other than fighting for Scotland's interests. And that's just not going to be the case anymore. You're going to have Scottish MPs willing our new Prime Minister on.
But there will be points of tension that may come up. And at some point, there may be things that, a Scottish electorate want to see. I mean, Anna Sarwar has already got points of difference from Keir Starmer on things like the two-child benefit policy, initially on the position of Gaza. When there are those points of tension, do you think the Scottish caucus, not saying publicly, but certainly privately, be able to say to the leadership, look, hang on a minute, you've got to do more for Scotland?
Well, I think all MPs will be thinking that their electorate is the boss, right? And they'll primarily be interested in advancing the cause of their own constituents in their own patch. And we've seen the PM announce today that they're already working on a child poverty strategy, for example. So as you know, that's one of the big causes of my life, and those of us who campaign on that and have pushed for that, I think, have already been heard. And the Prime Minister on day one has said that the child poverty strategy is going to be a very important measure of the success of the Labour government, just as it was for the last one.
Well, look, Kirsty, we'll have to leave it there. I'm sure it's a very busy time for you. You'll be getting ready to take up your position as a new MP. Many congratulations and thank you for your time.